show me how tough you are. But they always stop at that. These idiots, the neocons, they just like jumping up and down and stomping branches on the ground, in order to, I don't know, get their speaking fees up or their book sales up. But I find it really dangerous because in Russia, for example, it has a very chilling effect. This kind of exaggerated enemy talk and new Cold War talk. It has a really negative effect in Russia on America's image there, on what America supposedly stands for. America used to stand for, and Russia used to stand for some pretty good ideals like liberty, freedom of speech, democracy, and so on. And now it just stands, from their point of view, for exploitation and imperialism and complete hypocrisy.
Well, and when you talk about the view of the people of Russia there, you can look back at the history of why, for example, the Soviets were so intent on holding on to all of Eastern Europe, is to keep a buffer zone between them and the people who have been invading them over and over and over again for 3,000 years or whatever. Russia is the most paranoid society because they have a real history of just power after power after power on their borders coming and invading their country.
Yeah, that's true, and we don't. We really only experienced one big bloody war, the Civil War, but we weren't invaded in that one. And there's really nothing in the American conscience that can compare with what's in the Russian conscience. There's no sort of memory of the horrors of war and the fear of being invaded. Yeah, if you look again at the Cold War, the Russians, the Soviets were, they certainly weren't, good, but they were not aggressive. They weren't going around the world invading countries. Russia historically hasn't done that on the same scale that the Brits or the Americans or other European powers have done. They're very paranoid. They feel very vulnerable. And they're also extremely sensitive to how the West and how America views them and how the West and America treats them, and if it's fair or not, and so on. And because they feel they've been treated so unfairly and essentially been lied to, first with the so-called economic shock therapy reforms of the 90s, which bankrupted the country, then with us backing one of the most corrupt regimes that impoverished the entire country and which destroyed the democracy that they had there in the early 90s. By 96, Yeltsin was stealing every election, and then in 99 by invading Serbia and ignoring the UN vote on that, Russians feel so completely betrayed that they've really kind of withdrawn into themselves and into a kind of an anti-liberal, anti-Western, mood, because they see, they identify the consequences of, basically they think they were suckers in the 90s and they got completely suckered. And so the consequences, I think nobody in America, in American power, was really thinking, well, geez, if we rob these people blind and steal all their assets and, help them steal their elections and bomb without giving them any consideration, bomb Serbia, what are they going to do? They're so weak they can't do anything. Well, now we're seeing the consequences of it.
They never considered, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. The Russians might actually become nationalists if we do nothing but kick them while they're down.
Exactly.
Huh, amazing. And in fact, when you talk about broken promises, the first broken promise was James Baker told Mikhail Gorbachev, we will not expand NATO eastward. And in fact, what we've done is exactly that. How many countries in Eastern Europe aren't in NATO now? It's Georgia, Ukraine, and what, Hungary?
Belarus. No, Hungary's in it.
Belarus.
Yeah, that really is the first betrayal. The Russians don't buy it. We actually believe ourselves, which I find so odd. We believe ourselves when we say that NATO expansion is not a threat to Russia and it has nothing to do with Russia. It's odd, and they know it's complete BS.
Well, wait a minute. Now, who's we believe in ourselves here? I'm confused.
When I say we, I'm not talking about you and me, talking about the establishment in the West, the establishment media, the establishment political class.
So you don't even think it's really an ulterior motive that they just, it's a peace guarantee, not a war guarantee.
Exactly, and these people believe their own BS, and they also genuinely seem to believe their own BS about the ABM system. I can tell you, I was in Russia in, I think it was very late 2001 or very early 2002 when Bush announced that he was withdrawing. I think it was the very end of 2001. He announced he was withdrawing from the ABM treaty. Mm-hmm. And Putin, it's the one time I've actually seen him publicly, get on TV, make a speech, and look like he had just been brutally humiliated. Because when he agreed to allow American forces to use the bases in Central Asia in order to go after the Taliban, he took a lot of heat from his generals and the security services people and so on. And I think he kind of thought, again, this happens to every Russian leader. He thought, I'll do this big favor. I'll make a great gesture to help America in its time of need, and they'll pay it back. And so, he acquiesced to having the Central Asian countries open up their bases to American forces against all of his, as they call the security services, advice and the generals and so on. And as soon as Kabul fell and Kandahar fell, the first thing we did is say, okay, we don't need the ABM treaty anymore, and ripped it up. And, Putin was actually pretty seriously weakened by that. I mean, I think there was a lot of grumbling among his generals and FSB people. And so he went on TV to announce that, America was withdrawing from the ABM treaty and we shouldn't worry about it, and he kind of tried to calm everyone down. But he looked very, very humiliated. And I remember I asked somebody who worked in the Pentagon at the time, who I've known for a while, did we do that intentionally? Did we announce it at that time just as we got what we needed from Russia, that Afghanistan fell? Immediately we announced this. Did we do that intentionally to humiliate him? Was there some, method? Was there some reason for it? And he said Putin wasn't even a consideration, and his reaction wasn't even a consideration. We just figured this is a good time for our interests to abandon the ABM treaty. So now we have, just as the Russians feared, when we abandoned it, we said this is all about, protecting the free world from terrorists, and we'll all be in this together. Well, of course, they're building the ABM systems on Russia's borders in the former East European bloc countries. And now what we're saying is, but this has nothing to do with Russia. But this is all aimed at Iran and North Korea, which makes no logical sense. And, I don't know if you've read this, but in Foreign Policy magazine a couple of years ago, a couple of American professors explained in detail why, in fact, the ABM systems and placing them there is aimed at Russia, and the point of it is to allow America to be able to successfully launch a first nuclear strike against Russia, a completely devastating first strike, which would result in a total American victory.
Now, wait a minute. This is in Foreign Policy magazine, and who wrote it?
Yeah, I've written about this actually a couple of times. I can send you the link. I don't have that right in front of me right now.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, and this is something that we've talked about on this show. I guess I never knew where was the journal article that started the whole discussion, but this is not a defensive mechanism. This is like wearing armor to a fist fight.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is aimed at Russia. I mean, and I called one of the professors and asked him about it, and he explained, look, if we were, for example, if this was aimed at North Korea, and we want an ABM system to shoot down North Korean missiles, we wouldn't put them in Europe, 5,000 miles away. We'd put Aegis destroyers all around the peninsula in North Korea and try to shoot the missiles down just as they're launching, or shortly after they launch. That's basic sort of military doctrine. And then he went on to explain why and the odds. It's all laid out in a foreign policy article. And it's funny, we got very little play over here, but when that article was published in America, it was top news, all the radio stations, all the TV stations in Russia, and people were hysterical. And they actually thought that the reason why this article was published in Foreign Policy, which they thought, thinking in analogous terms, they thought that this was published actually by the government as a signal to Russia that look, we're already at this point now, and we already can launch a successful nuclear strike against you anytime we want to, and you're through. I mean, they took it as an